Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Getting PDM Ready. I'm Dennis Streeter, and joining me today is Darren Grosser.
Hello, everybody.
We'll be moving along pretty fast today here with our Lunch and Learn format, presenting information about what you and your company should be considering as you start to get PDM ready. We've had a lot of customers ask about this subject, so we thought it'd be a good topic here. Whether the time for you to look at PDM is a month away, a year away, or maybe even 5 years out, we're going to show you some features that you can implement today and begin planning that can help benefit right away, as well as make that transition into a PDM system pretty smooth. Our format for today will be Darren providing examples of tips and techniques that you can start using right away to help to operate more effectively in either the SolidWorks and or the Windows world, depending on where that tip and technique might be appropriate to apply. And then we'll wrap up the discussion on each area with an example of how that will be leveraged as you start to move into PDM. I'll also include a couple of benefits you should find along the way as you apply these tips or actually move into PDM. So we have 5 main topics to cover today, so sit back and enjoy the presentation. First thing that we're going to talk about today is knowing what type of company you are. Whether you're a product or a project design-centered business is going to go a long way toward how you set up and configure SolidWorks as well as your data management processes. Some companies we work with actually are both, and the environments can be set up and tailored as such. Not having a good foundation in place, though, is going to lead to extra time that you spend searching for files or, worse, possibly even recreating designs and information you've already done once but can't find when you need it. If you don't find what you need and it leads to recreating that same information again, now you've actually got duplicate data out there in your system that you have to deal with. And we all know what can happen when designs are similar but different because they weren't quite created identically to one another. I think that's probably safe to say that we've all had that happen to us in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're lucky to be an experienced employee at your company, you probably also know that you get the honor of being the guy that people are going to come to for those questions and the interruptions that it leads to when you're trying to find that file 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or maybe that spec that you did 4 years ago for that Maximus widget that a customer on the West Coast ordered. You remember that one? Somebody's got to, right? Well, Darren's going to have some tips and techniques here that are going to help you set up an environment to minimize those interruptions. Darren?
Okay, so the format we're going to keep this in is a little bit of how you do it in Windows today versus how you might do this using data management. Now, product versus project is kind of the eye of the beholder. I have a data management vault here just as a visual example where your projects can be set up or your product, depending on how you control these with numbers and maybe the customer, and then subfolders beneath those. Now, when we're using just Windows, a lot of people try to garner consistency through some pretty basic types of things. You might have somewhere on your computer just a folder full of a starting point. In this case, I just simply called it Start New Project. And underneath that folder, you might have some pre-created folder names that maybe go along with each project. And this really is the closest you can get to having a consistent start to a new project every time you launch. Many times what we see on users' networks is the folders look similar, but then as you get deeper and deeper, you'll find that they do diverge just based on whoever built these folders and at what particular time in the project. So a lot of that happens with just simple copy and paste or just the basic right-click, creating a new folder. Now, what that doesn't provide, no matter how you get this done, is any type of security. There's no controls really in Windows about who can do what in each folder. It's pretty much just wide open. And then with the files within those folders, you can give some read-write access and some control there. But once again, that does not guarantee consistency. The way we do this in PDM, in this case our Enterprise Data Management tool, is we provide you with some tools to be able to create these templates. And these templates allow you to simply have a user right-click, go down to New, and instead of the arbitrary and very rudimentary new folder, we can actually build up these consistent project or product structures depending on what you choose. Now, for consistency's sake, when you launch an item like this, we put a little interface around it, and this is also in the eye of the beholder, so we customize this for you. But essentially, you can give this a project name, and we're just going to call this Getting PDM Ready. We'll try that one more time. Pull-down menus are a really consistent method here. You can see in my pull-down menus in this case have 5 options. If I was to choose angle grinders, we can have the next menu really be relative to that. So there's 3 angle grinders, versus if I grabbed routers, then the next menu now switches to different types of routers. Pull-down menus are great because these allow us to go ahead and put things in that don't have to be retyped, therefore no possibility of a typographical error. And then there's even learning lists, things that can be put in simply based on who typed the last item in there, or just ones from the list that have already been placed in there. In any event, we allow this tool to then go ahead and generate the project structure for you. So just by simply selecting this, you'll see that it actually created the next folder possible with the next name in the serialized list, and then beneath that, we populated that with all of the files, and then in some cases, if you dig even deeper, some of these folders actually have the physical files that are necessary. So if you require something like a non-disclosure agreement, or spec sheets or sign-offs, things that always have to be there, they can be there and ready. Now, though this isn't terribly different than just having a copy and pastable folder set, when we're inside the Data Management Vault, we can actually eliminate the ability for the user to make a folder through the rudimentary right-click method. So in other words, what happens is if we go into any users or groups, we have the capability with these folders to be able to say yes or no. Can they add or delete a folder? So essentially, you can remove their ability to make a folder manually, but still give them the ability to launch the task, which then goes ahead and creates the folders automatically. Therefore, forcing consistency as opposed to just hoping things go consistent based on a user-to-user basis.
Good stuff, Darren.
Thanks.
I know that theme consistency is going to be something that we talk and bring up a lot today, right?
Yeah, very much so. Absolutely.
Absolutely, indeed. We really want you to lay a good foundation for your filing system today, because fostering a consistent scheme to store and find your information today, right now in Windows, is going to help to lay that same foundation in the future when you move to PDM. So doing so will also help you cut down on interruptions and the time that you spend looking for files, or worse again, time that you might have to spend recreating something that you can't find. So that's a great start to the presentation. The next topic that we're going to talk about are some basic SolidWorks file management topics. Call it File Management 101 with SolidWorks here. Not following good file management practices with SolidWorks is going to lead you and your team to spending a lot of extra time manhandling files through a Windows system and probably wondering where information is and properties are lacking, and how your templates are, and who's got the latest template, all sorts of bad stuff that can happen in this area, again, if you don't have a nice, consistent environment set up for your users. So Darren, what do you have for us to cover here?
Well, the way SolidWorks manages files today is in the basic Windows structure. The source, or the location of all the parts and subassemblies within this top-level assembly, is actually hard-coded paths within the SolidWorks assembly file itself. Under File and Find References, you're essentially going to see those paths, and those paths are, again, controlled and stored specifically within an assembly when data management isn't involved. On top of that, there are many other files that SolidWorks has to reference. So under Tools and Options, just basic Windows controls here, we go down to the File Locations category under the System Options, and you're going to have many different file locations to actually manage. Things like your document templates, the starting part, assembly, and drawing templates that you'd use to begin any document. But you also have many other ones, and you can see this pull-down list as a bit of an eye chart. There are places where your design library is located. In this case, I have several design library folders. Even things like material databases. Those are located all over your network or all over your local computers, whether it's the C:"program files folder, C:"program data, where we're starting to place things as well because of Windows 7 and the way Windows 8 is going. So these things have to be managed and really should be placed in a network location, having users look at all of those locations directly. The problem still becomes is if anybody goes into the design library and starts to move or rename any of these folders, then you're going to have a link that doesn't resolve itself. It'll simply show as a blank folder, or simply disappear actually as a folder that no longer exists. So there's many things that have to be considered within the flat structure of SolidWorks and the way a network or local user situation is going to be installed. When we get into data management, it's quite a bit of a different thing. First of all, when you're inside a data management vault, all of these folder locations are secured, and they're controlled by Enterprise PDM and the SQL database that's the underpinnings of the tool. So essentially, when you're looking at files within these folders, the links from one file to another are fully controlled within SQL. So if I go ahead and look at an assembly here, for example, this happens to be of a miter saw. We go into the bill of materials and we'll see what all the files consist of. But we also see very simply what this assembly contains. And if we take a look over here to the right-hand side, this is the actual folders within our C:\Enterprise PDM data vault that we actually have these files located in. And what makes this very powerful when you're inside of the vault is a couple of different things. First of all, the files themselves can't be overwritten. They just simply can't. The only way that I can put a file in of the same name of another one is to have it create another version. So there's a big safety net there that really inhibits the ability to accidentally overwrite anything, because really I can't overwrite it unless I've taken ownership of it, first of all. And secondly, I can't check it in and overwrite the previous version. I can only add another one. So there's a tremendous amount of security and safety net when it comes to the files themselves. What also happens is that these files are really located in some server somewhere. Now that server is on the network where it should be, but when a person checks out these files, it actually brings them to their local working folder, which in my case happens to be this Enterprise PDM folder on my C drive. And by bringing them locally, we get a tremendous amount of performance benefit because we're no longer working live across the network. Now that being said, the files come locally. When you check them back in, they simply transport only the changes back across the network into the real vault on the server somewhere. In any event, the files themselves are all controlled path-wise, name-wise through the SQL database. So if a user were to do something as innocuous as a little file rename, well, in this particular assembly, you'll basically see that as I scroll down it, all of these names are very serialized, so they're very simple. But what I want to do is a typical Windows function. Slow double-click, change the name. We're just going to put capital A's through this just to really emphasize the name change. And all I've done is a basic file name change. However, if I go back to that assembly, you'll notice that it actually picked up that change dynamically. If you did this in Windows, I think everybody on the call here would know that you would now have a situation when you open the assembly where it would ask you to browse because it simply can't find that file. Furthermore, if you look at the folder that all these files are contained in for this assembly, they're all in the same 2014 design data folder. Well, if I did another operation just as simple and common in Windows, where I pick a series of files, do a Control-X cut, maybe we'll go in here and we'll add a new folder, and then we go ahead and move by pasting these files into the new folder, that would devastate a user if they try to open the assembly that was looking for these files in the local directories and they had now moved if we're just using SolidWorks. However, in EPDM, when I select that assembly, you'll notice very quickly that the new location of those new files is assimilated immediately. Therefore, you never run into the situation where a file was moved or renamed and then now you can't find it. Even to add to that, if I pick this file that I renamed with all these capital A's, there's historical points that are created for everything. And if I go to my history, I can actually see what happened and when. So I had some transitions from work in progress to approved, did those a little earlier. But up here, I actually renamed the file, and this is what it was named before. Then I moved it to a different folder, all of which are documented by who did it and what time they did it, what the file used to be, and where it used to be. So not only is it easier, but it also documents these things so that if we need to, we can undo it, and there's absolutely no issue when it comes to files being lost or you being prompted to browse when you try to open these assemblies. All right, back to you, Dennis.
Thanks, Terry. I think that little group of topics right there might be the #1 frustration point for a lot of our users today. And I think the bottom line here is having a process that is easy to follow for your existing team. From having those paths laid out, those are things that you can control today in SolidWorks, to just having some manual processes that people have rules to follow on how to store files and where they should be stored so that you don't have the renaming or the moving things happening after the fact.
Yeah.
But again, that's a manual process. PDM really starts to shine for companies at this point when those things start to become part of the environment.
Right. And one more thing to add, too, is that the design library and the file templates that I mentioned before, really should and could be stored within the data management vault. So not only does the management of your existing CAD data become easier, but also the location of those files that are standards or templates. And one of the benefits of that is that you actually have a capability within our admin tool that simply says for a user or for a particular group that we can automatically cache the local information when changes take place or refresh the cache during login. So any changes made by management level or administrative level people will automatically trickle down to the users when it comes to templates being updated. So lots of benefits to that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Excellent. I'm sure that doesn't have any benefit to speed or performance, though, would it?
It has every benefit to speed or performance.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Obviously, if you think about maybe today you have a variety of paths that you got to look for this information that you've set up in SolidWorks. If that's all in one location inside of a PDM vault and SQL managing those locations, the performance is going to be significantly better for you, not to mention having it cached locally.
Absolutely.
So those are some of the considerations in that area, but we also like to say we'd encourage you, whatever stage you're at in your thinking with these processes, make sure you document these things so that those are information that new hires have so that they can onboard quickly with your company when they come in. We see that more and more these days as companies are recovering from the economic downturn that we're all getting out of and hiring more people. Now the challenge becomes, how do you bring people on board quickly? Having these types of tips that we are sharing documented goes a long way towards saving that time. So what do we have next up here, Darren?
Oh, I've got to talk about properties. Very big part of this.
Oh, definitely so. Probably one of my favorite topics because no matter what program you're using, there's properties that are going to be able to help you about managing information. And we're not talking about property management here like real estate. Instead, we're talking about your meta property or your attributes if you're an old AutoCAD user. And this is information that starts to really work for the engineering department inside of the parts and assemblies, but it starts to go out beyond that even into the organization as a whole to expand the use of your data and add value to the entire company. And dealing with this kind of stuff is kind of like having that little dark cloud over your shoulder that's just hovering there waiting to rain on you. You've done your graphic design, you've got a great design of a new part or an assembly, but then you got all this information that you got to bring up to speed so that the rest of these departments can leverage the information. So I think, Darren, you probably find that this is still an area today that a lot of companies are having a challenge with.
I got to tell you, this is yeah, absolutely. This is one of the biggest disappointments I have when I visit customer sites, when I find that they're not using properties. Now, properties could be as simple as a description associated with a file. So you can use generic file names and then give it a more verbose, searchable, or descriptive value as a description. But properties have an incredible amount of value whether you're using data management or not. So in more of just a Windows scenario here, let's go into SolidWorks for a moment, and I'll describe how properties should be used today without data management. When you start new files, these new document templates can actually have properties pre-built into them. Here's a blank part file, and if I go down to File and Properties, I have all my templates set to automatically have material and weight. Currently there's a value that it pulls from SolidWorks that's calculated, and right now there's nothing there because I simply don't have geometry, nor do I have a material specified. But these are waiting to be populated with something smart. I've also got a simple cost value down here, and that's just a static value that we simply typed in for this particular purpose. Now, properties can be added quite easily. You can pull it from a pull-down menu if you'd like. We can go ahead and grab a finish or a material. This list is completely up to you when it comes to how this is created. If I go ahead and say this is status, status is in process, that's just a value that is going to be within this particular file. Now, when I take a piece of geometry like this, and I'm just going to make this very brief because we're not really doing a SolidWorks demo here, what I now have is a piece of material. And that material has volume. Therefore, if I go to File Properties, you'll see that my weight actually has a calculated value. Not based on a particular material yet, so that's generic, but it does have a value because there's simply geometry on the screen. Now, properties can be very simple. They can be a description, but there can be a lot of properties that you want to manage. And doing them regularly in SolidWorks can be done very easily by just simply using our Property Manager tab. When you go to custom properties, you have the ability within SolidWorks to create what we call a property tab builder interface. And that allows you to simply make this as an interface that means what it means to each individual customer. So what you see here is part number, description created by, all this information is created by a user. Now the property tab builder is actually a little program that's inside your SolidWorks user interface. So if you go to your programs, SolidWorks, and down to SolidWorks tools, you'll see the property tab builder sitting right there. And this tool is a form editor. It allows you to go ahead and add group boxes and text boxes. So if I want a text box within this list, maybe I want a pull-down menu that's also within this list, and then that list can have values associated with it. So as we put these values in, we can simply test it and see what that pull-down would be. I want to go ahead and make sure I don't type Dennis's name with one N instead of two. I can have it part of the list. Therefore, when I search for Dennis, I don't miss things that are tagged with him because I simply didn't type it the right way when I put it in. So consistency from things like pull-down menus is tremendous. What I'm going to do on this one is just open one that I already have. And in this case, I've got part and assembly templates that I use regularly. You'll notice the one that I'm pulling up right now is actually the one I'm currently using within SolidWorks. Some of the beautiful parts about this, not only that you can put in pull-down menus, but we can have these learning windows where if I choose make or buy, make actually opens up my make tools, and buy would open up my buy tools. That being said, if I was to change from make, which has material inputs and finish inputs, and switch to buy, well, now I've got vendor information and a vendor list. Again, very, very consistent. So I'm not going to bother with the part number here, but I am going to make this a description block that is yellow. Great. Pull down menu here. I don't have to type my own name. Even date created. We'll just grab that as today's date, but it's a full calendar that pops out. We're going to choose make on this one. And when I go ahead and choose a material, we'll just go ahead and use a cast alloy steel. It's actually going to take that material and force it into our SolidWorks feature manager. Part changes graphically, everything in sync. And then my finish here, let's just go ahead and anodize that. So when I apply these properties, by using this really beautiful customizable interface, now when I go to File and Properties, I can see that all that has backfilled into the part. Now these properties are tremendously beneficial. In fact, I use them absolutely everywhere, especially when it comes to assemblies. Because the biggest key here is that I have an assembly file full of a bunch of parts that have properties. But when we go to a drawing, these properties are what we use to automatically populate the bill of materials columns and the title block. And that's really what the superpower of these things happens to be. Weight is a calculated value, scale of the sheet, the name of the file. I don't have to type anything in here, yet my drawing is completely consistent without error from one file to another. Here we have descriptions, the file names, the material that's been used, all without having to type anything in more than one single time. This information is just SolidWorks information at this particular point. Now when we switch over to data management, well, that's where what we've done in SolidWorks up till now before having data management doesn't get wasted. I'm going to go back to that little block that I created. This block currently is not in my data management vault, indicated by this icon right here. But what I'm going to do is place it in the vault. I'm going to do that by very simply saying File, Save As. Now when I save it, I'm simply navigating over to my data management vault, which appears as a folder wherever I choose to put my local vault view, in this case my C drive. And when I go ahead and save my file into that location, one thing it did for me is it actually automatically serialized the name. Didn't really plan to show that here, but that's a very cool part about what we can do to set up your vault. You see that my block is yellow. Description has already been placed here, but I could have placed it here if it was still empty. But on the save process, now once I put a file in the vault, I'm then presented with a customizable data card. Any of the values that I put in manually are going to backfill now into this data card. Anything that I might want to add at this particular location would then push back into the SolidWorks file. So if I go ahead and change this from block is yellow to block is cast steel, well now that actually is going to update my properties. The file is now in my data vault. You can see it's right there. We'll check that in just to be nice and consistent. All right. First check in, very good. But when I go to my file and properties, you'll find that with all these methods, everything is now one consistent result. In other words, what we call is many inputs, one result, or one vision of the truth. So that change that I made is going to be right here. Now if I take a look at this file inside of my vault, we'll just go ahead and navigate over to my EPDM vault. You'll see this file right down here at the bottom. Just grab the next name. And if we preview that, you can see very simply that this is the block that I checked in. However, graphically, we're actually seeing that all the properties are available to the right-hand side. The real power to all of these properties is data at our fingertips. And where we can take it even to the next level is if I'm trying to find data, maybe I don't know where it is, we can always locate it by using searches. Now, searches can be very simple. I have one that I've customized here where if I search via description or the owner of the file or the workflow state, we can really pare this thing down. It could also be super verbose and have almost every way to search, including using the data card inputs that we use to populate in the first place. So if I find a description here and I want to look for something that's cast, by running this, it actually finds the part, in this case, based on the input that we had here, and it's super easy to locate based on any one of or combination of the properties contained in a part, an assembly, or a drawing. So properties really, to me, are the unsung hero of a CAD system. They're very accessible, they're super descriptive, they're searchable, and they really are the brains behind a file, the metadata.
Without question, and Darren, you're a little bit younger guy than I am. I don't know if you ever got taught this back in the early days of your CAD youth, but it was an old battle cry when I grew up that you enter it once and use it as many times as you can.
Sure.
And I think the way that we've implemented the tie for properties, both in and outside of PDM with SolidWorks, has gone a long way towards helping to save time that engineers used to have to manually input this information, put it in other forms, templates, bill of materials. You know, the list was endless that we would have to go through back in the good old days of keeping track of this metadata and property information.
Well, companies don't realize that the duplication of efforts is where they just hemorrhage time and productivity, flat out.
Yep. Not only the duplication of efforts, but also is your user base at your company come to you and ask you where to find things, as you showed at the very end here, leveraging that property information so that everybody in the company can have their favorite searches that they're looking for information over and over prepared. They start to become self-sufficient and self-serving in that way. So it means more time for you to do design work that you really want to do rather than helping to become a librarian.
Certainly.
Yep. So let's move on to our next topic here on how do you release your designs. So every company releases their design work, but what does that mean in your company? Does that mean that you're releasing it to purchasing, your shop, or manufacturing floor? Maybe you're sending it out to a supplier. Some of our customers have to supply this data out to customers, field service, their sales departments as well. So it can mean a lot of different things. But the one question always is, does everybody know that process? And is everybody being effectively kept in the loop when these documents are being released? So, Darren, what do you have to show us about how you can quickly and efficiently work through a release process here?
Well, as you said, there's a handful of ways that we see designs released manually using Windows. And if you have a handful of users in your company, then I guarantee you're going to get every one of those methods used by different people. And usually that method comes down to just the managing of a file within Windows Explorer, more or less the copying and pasting of things. So typically what I'll see when I go to places is a folder structure or a file structure, and those files are going to have subcomponents and subfolders within those. And many times what will happen is a simple right-click of a folder and a copy, and another right-click and a paste. And what we'll get is a completely new folder with a slightly different name. Now many times, we're not going to leave the word copy on this, but we're going to call it Rev1, maybe today's date, maybe the customer or the person who did it. But we have duplicate folders that essentially segregate when that timestamp or that moment in time took place with a particular file being released. Now, that's not the greatest way because, frankly, you get a ton of duplicated data. When there are standard components involved in an assembly, what I've just done right now is duplicate files that never should be duplicated and that never change. So it's a big faux pas when it comes to just simple utilization of hardware. But it's a very common operation because now what I have is a folder that has a completely different group of data in it than the original. Another problem is propagation of change at that point. And if one of the standard components does change, now you have to touch it in every single folder. So this is a very basic yet very error-prone way to do it, as well as just inflating your file storage unnecessarily. When we're talking about data management inside of our ePDM vault, we can automate this process in a very effective way. So when I'm outside my search, and we're just going to go in here and locate some data, what I've got are some pieces of information down here that are actually pending approval, and we can designate these things using workflow states. Now the states are great because I can prevent people from seeing files that are in a particular state. So for example, manufacturing people would only see approved files, but they would never even know that a pending approval file exists until it's ready to be generated or manufactured. That said, management level users have the capability of doing their job, which would be the approval process. Well, on any workflow step, what we can do is trigger any type of file that SolidWorks would create. So as a very automated process here, what I want to do is just simply right-click this file, and I'm going to go down to Change State. And one of the choices that I have there as a management level person is Approved. Well, when we approve this file, we'll say it looks good, use now. We try to capture those things that you would do in real life here. Many times when a file gets approved, somebody has to print it, they have to walk it to somebody, or differently, maybe make a PDF, and then send an email out with that PDF attached. In any of those events, we can capture every single one of those operations with one single click. So what I'm going to do on this one here is just make sure that for a moment visually that we're out of our PowerPoint presentation, because I want you to see the whole desktop here. But I'm going to hit Approve right now. And I'm a management level person logged in currently. It actually doesn't have any access to SolidWorks. Yet when I hit Approved, the system is now going to do every one of my tasks for me. In the upper left-hand corner here, after a couple of seconds, you'll actually see SolidWorks launch. And what it's doing is, on approval, creating a PDF. But not just creating a file. It's sending emails to manufacturing people, it's sending confirmation emails back to me, and it's notifying everybody of the fact of what just took place. Therefore, from my seat with a single click, I can really take care of every part of my responsibility that's prescribed within our workflow process. So while that's taking place, I'll show you this in the administrative tool for just a moment, but our workflows can be designed for any specific environment. Now while I was doing that, we get a notification that comes back to me. So when I click on that, it basically says, hey, all the documents were approved, created as PDFs, and it even made the PDF and put it in a folder that my manufacturing people can see. In fact, the only folder that my manufacturing people can see. They're getting an email about it, they know what to do next, and I never had to leave my chair. All of this is done through simple workflows, where upon approval, we actually went ahead and took the file and changed it to who checked it, the date they did it, bumped the revision, and the step I'm not showing you here, we actually exported an XML bill of materials out so that any other type of system, ERP or otherwise, could then pull that in and assimilate the data. Then we bumped the revision, and then we created a PDF automatically. Could have been a JPEG for sales, could have been a step file for manufacturing, could have been any file type we save for any downstream consumer of that data. So that's how the approval process gets automated, very consistent, yet effortless.
Cool stuff. This is really, I think this area and our next area are where PDM starts to kick it up a notch and foster that consistency that really starts to save time that you spend today pushing or creating documentation around your organization. Some of the areas that we talked about earlier can help foster that consistency, but as we've noted, they all tend to be kind of human-driven processes. I think releasing documents is really where a lot of companies spend a lot of man-hours today with these driven processes that require good discipline. You know, today you'll start getting a really good return by having those processes documented, because if you create a flow chart of how your processes flow right now, how a document gets released, it's going to serve as both a good communication tool, again, for those new hires coming into your company, but you're also going to have a reminder there for existing employees how your release process should work, or if it changes slightly and they're used to doing things in a certain way, now they have those guidelines by having that flow chart created. The nice thing about that as well, when we work with companies that have done this, it's really simple to start going in and doing what Darren showed you with the workflow process and taking that flow chart and replicating it inside of the enterprise tool. It takes a lot of the time on the setup and the configuration and the decisions that you have to make when we get to that point and you're ready to go into PDM. So, next topic, do we ever change? I think in today's world that's pretty much inevitable, isn't it? The world of engineering, designs are always evolving. Information's missed or mistakes happen, or we just come up with a better idea on how to do something. So how many of your company changes require ECR and ECO process and management to take place? It's really one of the key impacts that can affect the productivity in your company or organization with the communication of those changes and how effectively you're pushing that through. So we're going to take a quick minute, and this is going to be our last topic here that we speak about, that you can use some techniques today, and then Darren will have some really good examples on what PDM, again, kicks it up another level here for us.
All right. Well, the only thing I say about this, and it's something I've said a million times, is really the only thing that is consistent about design is change. So things are evolving. You had an idea. That idea really flushes itself out as you hit dead ends or find new evolutions and things. So it is constantly happening. Well, there are tools within regular Windows that we would use to do this today. We'll go back to the previous folders I was showing you before. Inside of SolidWorks, you have some capabilities called Pack and Go, and that can be accessed whether you're inside the SolidWorks user interface under File down to Pack and Go, or whether you're just regular in Windows Explorer and you right-click on an assembly or a part and go to SolidWorks and click Pack and Go. And this is a way for us to take an assembly and essentially make a one-off. You can choose the files that participate within this. You can even transform the file names by doing a very simple operation of adding a prefix or adding a suffix. So if I want to go ahead and segregate all these files out to a brand new name, what it will do is it will take the file save names and it will simply update those with 1234 or 1234 space, just to make them a little bit cleaner. But this will give you some capabilities to filter out files that maybe aren't going to ever change. Still becomes a very manual process due to the way you have to input and check and really validate this as you are making these duplications. You run into a reference hassle, want to keep the files that we are going to have as standards where they are without duplicating those, yet know which one of these things have to change and evolve and rename with these new projects. So it doesn't turn into a very easy process, though it does have a mechanism for it. In any event, there's no documentation of this change. It doesn't know what you've done and when you've done it or why you've done it, and there's just simply no piece of audit trail that a user looking at this from outside would be able to look at it and understand why it just happened or frankly what just happened. So it is a nice tool, but it's still a very manual process nonetheless when it comes to the management of those particular files. When we get into PDM, we really have a lot of control over this in a very nice aspect. In this particular situation, what I've got is a file here, which again is that MITRE box, and it happens to be approved. Well, this is one that as we approve it, it's revision. It's something that we have produced. Revision is essentially a manufactured or released document. Well, now as a management level person, I would right-click on that, and I want to do something different. So in this case, management level would have a change state here with access to create their engineering change order or notice, whatever the acronym that you would use today. These are simply up to you, what shows on the right click. But as I create an engineering change of something, what I'm then going to be shown here is a bit of an interface for it. What do I want to change? I've got to add a new, we'll call it a yoke in this particular one. But when I go ahead and fire this off, we are again going to capture the things that one would do manually in the process and instead make it automatic based on the process that they're doing, which in this case is creating the ECO. In this event, when I say OK to this, we're actually going to be presented with an electronic version of a piece of paper I might fill out normally. Now this is active data, so when I go ahead and enable my ActiveX content, you'll see that these fields down here automatically populate themselves with the name of the file I right-clicked, the location of it has a hyperlink built in, and then I can complete the filling out of this document as necessary. So the reason is better and stronger part, good deal, and a yoke. So now we go ahead and document what happened. Who did this process, the date that they did it, this stuff automatically filling out as it happens. When I save this file now, anybody in the design loop is now being informed about this engineering change order through our notification process. Now, as an administrative person, I'm pretty confident in my change. I'm just going to go ahead and approve this particular process. So now I have a work in progress. The beauty of this kind of a thing is that as other users are within the system, they're getting the notifications that there is now work to be done that are non-management level people in our scenario. So it's a very effective way to do this type of a thing. Not to mention that, but as change evolves, we're getting historical points of how a product was when it was released at one point versus maybe how it evolved over the years. Now, case in point of that one is if I look in SolidWorks, I have my Jaws of Life here, my Halmatro file. And this file actually happens to be version 3 of 3. We released this at one point. We can see some anecdotal data up here as to what the reference versions happen to be and who has ownership of this file. There's a lot of different things that actually can take place with this file. But one of the great parts about this is that as the file evolves and has become newer, if I have to service one that I shipped years ago, I don't have to search for the folder that I hopefully saved at the time that that previous version of this was actually shipped. What I can actually do is right-click here and do a get. Now, because the file names don't change within our system, we just simply have historical versions that are added to those, I can really go back in time and get the initial version of this that was checked in and released. What I'm going to see here is that this particular area of the handle was actually different back then. So if I go ahead now and say a get, it's going to get an older version of the arm. It's also going to get an older version of the handle assembly. And when we do the get on that, graphically you'll see right here will update. So without changing file names, I'm visually shown that these are now older versions than are the latest and greatest of these files within the vault, which is just a historical point. That's neither good nor bad. But it gives us the flexibility to see how this design evolved from its initial release to now right-clicking and saying Get Latest Version, which will then update me to the latest version of all these particular files. And once again, you will graphically see that all those versions of those files now come back and they're fully usable. So within the system, we're not renaming files, we're not renaming folders, we're not duplicating standards. We are simply choosing how this file looked upon a check-in and a release that happened to have happened maybe weeks ago, years ago, whatever it is. But change documentation, very, very easy to go back and forth within history.
Good stuff, Darren. And I think, right to the initial message here, change is inevitable. We all have to face it in one way, shape, or form. How we deal with it, some good tips there for today for the SolidWorks users. I think as well, a lot of folks all have forms that they use when they make a drawing change, maybe doing some things and talking with us about how you automate some of those things could be something that you chat with us on, as well as with the properties going back to there. Happy to talk with any companies that aren't sure what direction that they want to go or should be going today with just SolidWorks. You don't have to talk to us just about what do you do when you come into PDM. So I think wrapping it up here, one of the themes that you've been hearing from us throughout this presentation today is, are we consistent or are we consistently inconsistent? And I think every organization has a degree of the latter and hopefully more of the former. And hopefully you've gotten some ideas today that you can get more consistency into your processes so that when you're ready to take the next steps and implement PDM, it's going to be a natural evolution, not a revolution, because everybody knows what revolutions end up as. Not normally a good scenario, right there?
Not at all.
We like to make it as smooth as possible for companies that are thinking about this in ways that you can get more out of your tools today. So we've shared some techniques that are going to set you up for that evolution while saving you that time and creating some better processes today. And I just reiterate again, if you have any questions about what you're doing today or how to approach something, don't hesitate to get in touch with either Darren or myself or through our help desk system so that we can help you discuss and roundtable some ideas that might be appropriate for your company. Because I think one of the things that we see as well is pretty much every company does a lot of these things slightly different from one another, wouldn't you say?
Oh, sure. Yep, everybody's slightly different, but still with the same goal in mind.
Yep, definitely so. So we hope you found this session helpful and that you've gotten at least a couple of ideas to go back and start working with today. And maybe just all in all, you've only been able to confirm that you're already on a pretty good path towards data management. And that's a good thing too. So we hope that's the case for you. And we look forward to our next webinar and bringing you more information on data management. Darren?
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. So as we've shown, you can do this in Windows, you can do it with normal file management, and data management hasn't been around forever. But the more intellectual data you produce, the larger of an issue this is going to become. So we can get a hold of it now or later, but what we've seen is that everybody is going to data management as a necessity just to make their lives easier.
Indeed. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Have a great day.